Hi, I'm Nathan. This is Nice at Dice. How many board games is too many board games? And how do you know if you have too many board games? And if you do have too many board games, how do you solve that problem? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. I've mentioned in previous videos that I'm trying to reduce my collection of board games. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about why I feel the need to do that and some steps that I'm taking to reduce the number of board games in my collection. So just as a frame of reference, I have, I think, about 160-ish board games, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I want to make clear, starting out, that I'm not making any judgments here about how many board games anybody else should own. Some people are going to own far more board games than I do and still feel like they want to get more, and that's fine. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of my situation and what I feel is reasonable for me. So there's really three basic factors that help me come to the decision that I have too many board games. First of all, I have on the shelf behind me a whole bunch of board games. One of these cubes right over here, it has Cry Havoc, Civilization, A New Dawn, Spectre Ops, and Mission Red Planet. Now those are 4 games that I really enjoyed, but have only played once each. And the same can be said about a lot of the games on that shelf. So that was one of the things. I realized I had a lot of games that I really enjoyed, but I've only played once. Why have I only played them once? Basically because I have so many games, I feel the need to play other games, and so I don't get back to these games that I really enjoyed. And I think that's just kind of a shame that I own games that I really enjoyed, but I don't get back to play them again because of just an overabundance of good things. I specifically want to limit my collection to about 50 games. Now, having like about 160, 170 right now, that's a long ways to go. Right now, I'm going to try and get it down to less than 100 games, and then we'll see from there if I can winnow it down even further. But I feel like 50 it would be kind of a sweet spot for me because I rarely get the chance to play games more than once a week. Sometimes I'll go longer than that before I get to play games, but then I'll play a couple of games at a time. So I think I average about maybe 1 game a week. So I figure if I had about 50 games, I could play average 1 game a week, and within the span of a year, I'd get to play all the games in my collection, which I feel like would be a nice place to be at as far as being able to replay games, to explore new strategies, and get more familiar and get more enjoyment out of the games that I own. And then, of course, another thing is just practical storage limits. So you see I have this 4x4 Kallax behind me. I have another 4x2 Kallax under that. So some of that is role-playing games, but most of it's board games. I have more board games in my closet over here. I have a box of board games on the floor that are already going out. I just haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to get rid of them yet, but that's more games over there. I've got another box of board games on the floor over here that are games I haven't played yet, and I have a few board games in my living room as well. So it's just gotten to the point where I don't have room to have all the board games that I own, much less add any more to that. So that's another reason why I'm trying to limit and really even reduce my collection. So how do I go about doing that? How could you maybe go about reducing your collection if that's something you feel the need to do? Well, first of all, I'm trying to be more selective about what games I add to my collection. No, I've always been one to kind of research games. I like watching reviews of games on YouTube. I'll go through Board Game Geek and look for reviews there, or just more general information about games. So I try to be selective in that way about what games I buy, but basically I'm trying to be even more selective than that. Do even more research. Don't just look at one review, but watch a couple of reviews, that kind of thing. And I'll ask myself a few questions about a game before I buy it. So for one thing, I'll say, do I already have a similar game? I have a couple of worker placement games, for example. So if I'm looking at a new worker placement game, I'll say, do I already have a worker placement game? Yeah, obviously I do. Is this really the kind of game I enjoy? So oftentimes I'll see games and it's like, that's an interesting concept for a game. I'd be curious to see how that plays. But then is it really a game that I'll personally enjoy? It may be interesting, it may be innovative or unique, but is it something that I'll really enjoy playing? See, that's something I haven't really thought deeply about before, but I'm starting to identify better what my personal tastes are in games and restrict my purchases to games that I really believe I'll personally enjoy instead of just buying something because it looks interesting or because maybe it looks like something that someone in my gaming group or family would enjoy playing. I try to narrow it down to games that I know I'll personally enjoy. Another thing is, can I picture myself playing this game multiple times? And that kind of ties in with the last question, but really just even if it's something that I would enjoy, is it something I'll enjoy over and over again? So if it isn't, I could probably do without it. And then another question is, what game could this replace? So if I'm trying to shrink my collection, reduce it to a certain number of games, then any new game I buy is going to have to replace something else. So when I'm looking at a new game and considering buying it, I have to ask myself, okay, what game would this replace? Now, I also need to gradually remove games from my collection if I want to reduce the overall number. So one of them is kind of that one in, one out policy. In fact, as I mentioned, I have a box here of games that I haven't played yet. As I get to playing those, basically each game I play, I ask myself, which of these games on my shelf is it going to replace? And if I can't pick one of these games for it to replace, then it's going to have to go. So I right now I have the problem of having a box full of games that I have to make that decision about with each one of them as I play it. But as far as buying new games, I'm trying to kind of proactively ask that question before I even own the game is, okay, when I play this, if I like it, what game is it going to replace? And then I don't feel too bad about buying a game and then maybe not liking it as well as I thought I might, and then passing that game along to someone else rather than replacing one of the games I have, because I do like the experience of playing new games, but just trying to reduce, the number of times that that happens, and just, ask myself proactively, if I'm going to buy this game, what game could it potentially replace if I like it as well as I think I will? And then also try and keep only my favorites among similar games. So for example, I mentioned I have a few worker placement games. So that's one thing that I'll ask myself is like, if I was only going to keep one worker placement game, which is my favorite? And sort of narrow it down to that. Another thing that I'm trying to do in order to be content with a smaller collection of games is find ways to add value to my favorite games. So instead of just adding more games, I want to add value to the games I already have. One is to play each game more. That's one of the main goals of this, is to have fewer games so I get back to the games I really enjoy more often. That gives me the opportunity to explore new strategies, to have different experiences with the same game. Another way I can add value to my favorite games is buy expansions for them, play with those expansions. It's another thing I consider going forward if I'm going to add a game to my collection. Does this game have expansions so that if I really enjoy it, I can continue to add value to that game? Also, I think about adding accessories to games. I've been doing that a little bit lately, buying play mats or like the wood organizers for the game boxes, things like that. Anything to kind of, I don't necessarily like bling out my games, just upgrading the components or whatever, but anything that will make the play experience go more smoothly, be more enjoyable by having things more organized either on the table or in the box. And then of course there's always the opportunity to create house rules or even homebrewed content for games that I really enjoy. Some games really lend themselves to this. Some games it's not necessary at all, but some games really lend themselves to that. Just as a couple of examples, I have the game Doctor Who: Time of the Daleks. It's a game that I like in general. I like the general premise of it, and I like the theme of it. But the mechanisms of it are like not quite what I was hoping for in the game. So, in order to add value to that game, because it's a game I want to keep in my collection, I want to get it played. I've been working on some house rules to make it fully cooperative instead of just semi-cooperative. So that's one example of how to do that. But that's basically it. So trying to limit what games I buy by doing more research, by asking more critical questions before making those purchases, by sort of enacting a one in, one out policy. So if I get a new game, it needs to replace a game I already have, which means the new game that I get needs to be something I really think I'll enjoy more than a game that's already on my shelves. And then also narrow it down if I have multiple games that kind of fit in the same category. We'll pick my favorite in that category and just keep that. And then look for ways to increase the value of my favorite games. Now, specifically, what I'd be interested to hear from you, my audience, is when it comes to improving the value of your games that you already have, what are some ways that you do that? I've listed a few things that I've thought of, but that's something I'd really like to do more of. So if you have any thoughts about how to increase the value of games you already own and enjoy, I'd love to hear about that in the comments of this video. Anyway, this has been Nathan, and thanks for watching Nice Dice.